Hello everybody, it's your non-binary pal Gracious E.V.A here, and will you believe me if I tell you that this video took my almost a whole year to make. Last year, I had a spontaneous idea to draw the planets as character designs. Some of the YouTubers have already done this, like Lavender Down and Prickly Alpaca for example, but what I've noticed a lot of people do when making these type of videos is either, or kachinkas, I think. Is it kachinkas? You know, which are just what if this thing was a normal human. I hope I said that word right. Or something close to that. However, I find designing humans to be boring, so I went with my favorite thing to design: hot, slightly humanoid, non-binary alien gods. So yeah, all of these characters I'm going to be showing are non-binary and most likely use they, them, so keep that in mind. I really wanted these to all be epic paintings and maybe have a bit of a story to them, which is part of the reason why this took so long. I decided to have a portal in each one that are the planet symbol, and I added these to also show the height difference with everyone, since the size of the alien will correspond to the size of the planet. And yeah, when I say alien god, I do mean like god. They're probably like the gods of this planet or the guardians of it, and they all appear more humanoid, but I had headcanon that they actually change shape depending on who's like looking at them. So if it's a human, they look more humanoid, but depending on the alien creature that lives on that planet, it might change its shape for whatever aliens that is on that planet. I looked up a lot of cool things with each planet as well, and used a lot of that for my art character designing. So yeah, with that, let's get started. The first planet is, of course, Mercury. For Mercury's design, I wanted them to feel really gloomy and kind of dead, since I always think of Mercury as being kind of the saddest planet. Some things I learned are that it's impacted with many craters, has an extremely thin atmosphere made of sodium and hydrogen, and parts of it are continuously being lost to space. I tried looking up more spiritual or the linguistic meaning behind the name, but for Mercury, I found out about the scientific meaning, which is the chemical symbol Hg, which comes from the Greek word hydranium, which means liquid silver. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also looked up the origins of the gods, since every planet is named after a god, and for Mercury, their Greek name is Hermes, god of thieves and messengers. I also looked up stuff about the animals and zodiac sign of the planet for each one, but none of those are really important here. The final thing I found was the planet symbol, which I did for each one, and after making a mood board, this was the rough draft I made for them. It's very simple, and a lot of these ended up being that way since I put more focus on their bodies instead of things like their clothes. These are alien gods, and even they are humanoid shape, I wanted them to feel as alien as possible. But as you can see, they are very gray and have a bunch of markings which act as their scars. I also gave them a sort of veil thing along with their long hair and horns, which I actually gave all of these designs. I also planned for their eyes to be completely black and have no nose or eye or mouth. This is sort of something I plan to do, where the amount of facial features each character has depends on how many moons the planet has. But this is a very loose rule that I didn't really end up sticking that much to. But since Mercury has no moons, I gave them just eyes. Although Mercury is one of the simplest designs out of everyone, I think their artwork was one of the more tougher ones. I mentioned that I looked at the symbol for each planet, and this is because I came up with a little bit of lore that the planet gods used to be able to connect to each other using portals that are in the shape of the planet symbol. Mercury's portal was going to be pretty big because they're one of the smaller gods. The god's size correlates to the planets, and Mercury is the smallest non-dwarf planet. Because of that, there was a lot of focus put on the planet along with the rest of the piece. I shaded everything super texturally since Mercury is just a lot of rocks, but I ended up enjoying the process a lot. Since the portal was a little bit of, or has a little bit of gold in the center, which was inspired by some pictures of Mercury that have more color, I treated this as one of the light sources. I also added these silver tears that are flowing upwards due to the lack of gravity. I imagine that they themselves can also float naturally. Mercury is a very sad and lonely god. I imagine that whatever alien species that used to live on there is now long since gone, and no one really bothers to visit them. Something I also added here was a couple of the planets in the sky that are the closest to them. Something I did with all of them. So if you can find them in this one and figure out which ones they're supposed to be, let me know. It can be a little Easter egg hunt. I think the sky also, weirdly enough, makes this piece seem more gloomy. Even though it is space, I painted it in a way where it's like obvious that this planet has no atmosphere, and that's how kind of dead it is. But yeah, this was the start of a very long series, but a very fun one. So let's keep going. This next one is Venus, and this one definitely ended up being one of my favorite designs. When people typically depict Venus, they'll depict them as the love god, inspired by the fact Venus's Greek name is Aphrodite. However, I wanted to depict the more violent nature of the actual planet. The word Venus roughly translates to love or charm, and the animal and zodiac that go along with them does not matter because I do not use those facts. It's about the same size as Earth, has a bunch of rough mountains and volcanoes, might contain pyrite or magnesite, and has a toxic atmosphere filled with carbon dioxide and thick yellow clouds of sulfuric acid that traps the heat. This causes the planet to be the hottest one, with the surface being 900 Fahrenheit or 475 Celsius. So yeah, the fact that this planet is often depicted to be gentler and the loved one is pretty wild when you know what the actual planet is like. With these things in mind, this is the design I gave it. Also very simple, with the colors very much matching the yellows and oranges of the planet. I gave them these golden accessories such as chains and the silk crown, inspired by the pyrite fact, since pyrite is the fool's gold. I made their hair long and fiery, even like billowing out into little tufts of fire hair, and added these smoke-like patterns on their skin. I also later on added actual flames in their eyes instead of irises. Although Venus also does not have any moons, I gave them normal facial features, making them one of the more conventionally attractive gods. They are more of a seductive character, but will use that seductiveness and charm to trap their victims, probably burning them or something. This actually lines up with the actual lore of the real-life god. Aphrodite/Venus was a menace to society. Not to mention that, to the Mayans, this god was actually a war god. This artwork was very fun to create, especially the background. I tried matching it as closely as I could to the planet and added rain clouds that are pouring toxic rain. I don't know if this is true, but I think I saw somewhere that Venus rains diamonds. If that's not true, let me know, but that might be a thing. I don't know, something diamond like. I had them sitting on a throne of rock, and for some reason rendering this was reminding me of when I worked on the Demon Zhongli artwork. It is kind of a similar composition, but to add some scale to this god, I decided to add in a little astronaut guy, who I would also include in the other artworks to help with scaling. So you can probably tell that this god is a whole lot bigger than the last one. The portal is also placed by the throne and is way less detailed since it's much smaller. Although this god might look like the most humanoid and attractive, they are actually one of the most violent gods. Something else I like to think about was the alien species that these gods would rule over, and for some reason I really like to think that the alien planet on this one are robots that were made to adapt to the heat and are very murderous, maybe partially inspired by the alien robots from the Lost in Space show. But yeah, like I said, this was one of my favorite artworks. I really liked it when I finished it, and I still do like it. And of course, next up is Earth. This was one of the ones that took me the longest to draw. I did not bother looking up anything about Earth, because I think I would know a bit more about this planet already, just kind of assuming that. The only thing I did look up was the planetary symbol, and the most common one I found was this plain circle design. Although sticking to just greens and blues would have been easy, I wanted to show the diversity of Earth more, so I made their skin look rocky and textured, adding moss and greenery around their legs and arms, along with cracks where water is pouring. Their hair is supposed to not only match the ocean, but also the daytime sky, with clouds gently surrounding them. One of their, on the one side of their face and horns is also white to match with snow and ice. And in the artwork, I decided to have their eyes, including the third one on their forehead and kind of eye one on their stomach, to match whatever the sky looks like. And in this one, it's a sunset, so those are the colors I chose to sort of like swirl within their eyes. With the way I rendered them as well, they also kind of look like gemstones, which I think are really neat. The background was definitely the most complex. I wanted one side to be a valley that leads into a forest, the other side to be a desert with a river flowing in the background and snow peaked mountains in the far back. And in the sky, you can obviously see the moon and also little dots that's supposed to be Mars. Although there was a lot of detail, I never felt like I was having a bad time with it. And I do really like how this one turned out. The background was also fairly simple to render, since it's like, you know, I've painted landscapes before that are somewhat similar to Earth's environment. So yeah. I only don't have much to say about it because there wasn't as many background things to discuss, since I know this planet at least a little wilder than the others. So yeah, I will say I do kind of like how I drew them here. They kind of look like a cow, which I think is kind of funny. It kind of references that saying of like the cow jumps over the moon thing. I think that's neat. But as you can also probably tell, this god is a lot more gentler, kind of matching with that Mother Earth vibes, even though they're not Mother Earth, they're non-binary god Earth. And they have their portal in the center of their lap where they're sitting cross-legged. It's kind of more like a spiritual composition almost. But yeah, I like how this one turned out a lot. Next is Mars. This one also ended up being one of my favorites, especially with how I rendered everything. Mars is always depicted with fire and anger, since not only is it named after the war god, but because it is the red planet. I don't really like this because Venus is literally right over there in all its fiery glory, and I've never seen Mars as an angry planet. In fact, I've always seen it as more of a grounded planet covered in dust and rock, and having maybe potentially have had life before, or at least have the building blocks for a future life. The planet also has a bunch of ice glaciers. This was the design I came up with. It's definitely very fluffy, and the reason why is because I actually took inspiration from the planet's designated creature being a wolf in House of Airs. This also made sense to me because of the ice glaciers, kind of insinuating that some parts of this planet might be colder than others, or at least used to be. I don't know, I think the ice might be more like akin to dry ice, but I think it still works. I gave them this sort of fur shawl thing around their shoulders, twin tails, and legs covered with hair. The rest of them is much more rocky, with cracked parts, but there are several areas that are supposed to be frosty, mainly the ends of their arms and one side of their face, matching with Earth's. I also gave them some spikes on their face to match the glaciers, and an extra smaller eye under their main one. I kept their hairstyle simple, deciding to go with one side being long and the other being short with a small braid. A last minute thing I also added while drawing was making their fingers to be more squared and their forearms to look more skeletal. Does that make any sense? No, but I actually really love how it looks. It kind of ties it together in a weird way. Everything was super fun to render, and I decided to add the sun to be towards the right of the composition and rendered everything with a nice golden color. I made the sky a red to yellow gradient with the two moons of Mars in the back, and added a lot of texture and striped patterning to the planet itself. I also added these faraway glaciers in the back, If you're wondering where the portal is, they're actually sitting on it. And you might be wondering why the portal is quite a bit bigger than the other pieces, and this is because Mars is actually a lot smaller than I thought before. It's only about half the size of Earth, and is the second smallest non-dwarf planet. Because of this, their portal has the second most detail, although it might be a little harder to see because of how they're sitting on it. The little astronaut is in their ship this time, and Mars is actually interacting with it. This version of Mars is very gentle and calm, but also very intelligent. I like to imagine their alien species to be some sort of ice wolf species that's also very intelligent, living among the ice glaciers, since the dust storms that come up in the rest of the planet is a bit too much for them. But yeah, like I said, this was very fun to render, and you'll get to see that here. Now we're on to Jupiter, the first of the gas giants. You might have noticed that all of the planets before this seemed more rocky and physical. Well, for these ones, I decided to make them seem like they were not solid figures, just like their planet. They also ended up being the less humanoid ones. Jupiter's design did give me a little trouble. As you can see, their concept sketch looks slightly different, but I ended up changing it in the art sketch since I really wanted their one solid big eye to be prominent, and big Sauron vibes in this one. This is of course because of the big red storm on the planet. The planet is the biggest one in our solar system, has 3 layers of clouds, each being made of different things, and is named after the god of lightning, aka Zeus. I decided that in this artwork we see the god inside the storm itself and have them be controlling orbs of lightning and energy. And one of these orbs is the portal, which is obviously super tiny and a little hard to spot. Since a lot of god pantheons have a leader or a ruler of some kind, I figured this god acts as that, or at least they are the most feared among the others. Like I said, I gave them one huge eye to match the storm, which completely cuts off the upper part of their head and also a grimacing mouth. The ornaments around the eye are meant to resemble a crown. They are adorned with mostly silver accents, and I did give them this kind of a cuter hairstyle, which is short with an underside, but it's covered in a veil that's not too dissimilar to Mercury's. There's also stripes covering their body and lightning marks as well. And they have 4 arms with legs that are, at least in the picture, still being formed with gas clouds, and their lower and upper body are only being held together by wisps of clouds. In a lot of ways, this design could be seen as the scariest of the rest, with a sort of body horror angle to it. The background itself was easy, even though I procrastinated on it, and there's just a little bit of space peeking through the clouds. You can probably tell that this god is a little angrier than the rest, a little more hostile. That was very intentional, as that matches the whole vibes of the planet itself. But yeah, not too much else to say about Jupiter. Now next up is Saturn, and this one probably ended up being my favorite design. For this one, I decided instead of drawing from the fact that Saturn is a gas giant, and decided to go for the draw more from the rings that surround it. Information about Saturn is pretty similar to Jupiter, and the rings are thought to be pieces of comets and asteroids torn apart by Saturn's powerful gravity. I thought it'd be cool to have this god being torn apart as well, like the comets, with chunks of themselves constantly swirling around them. I also added a bunch of circular chains around them, around their transparent skirt, around their chest, very everywhere, and most noticeably around their head, marking an X. These orbs are connected here are actually their eyes, so that's 13 eyes in total, which was unintentional that it ended up being the most famous or infamous unlucky number, but it definitely works here. This character is literally being torn apart by the planet that they're protecting, the chains probably acting to keep them together. However, they are still smiling, as you can see in this picture. The limbs were a little complicated, but super fun to draw. I had the arms sort of being more diamond-y shape, and the legs kind of sort of like splitting towards the ends, creating little points, and their hands are also drawn a little differently. And in one hand they're holding a clock. This is because the real life god Saturn is the god of time and architecture, so I figured this one probably acts as such too. And in the center is their portal. As you've probably noticed, we're not on the actual planet this time, but on one of the moons, looking down at the planet. Getting to draw the planet was super fun, just like drawing a bunch of swirls, and I do still really like the composition here. I also kept on going with the rounded pattern, and on Saturn's actual skin, quote unquote, instead of it just being stripes like I've done with a couple of the other planets, I had it be more like circular little shapes that kind of form into like a stripe pattern. It was just one way I thought of like making them like slightly different from some of the others, and also fitting in with the rounded theme of everything. And yeah, like I said, this one was really fun to draw. I had to draw a lot of like rocks surrounding Saturn themselves. They also have rocks coming out from their ribs as well. And one last minute thing I added were these fish nets on their legs. I literally did this just out of nowhere when playing with a brush, and I really liked it, so I kept it. And it also works because the brush has rounded dots that connects the lines, which goes very well with the whole round theme here. And I also added one more halo behind them and a couple other little glowy circles. See if you can spot them all. There's a lot. Now we're on to Uranus. I don't want to hear anything about this, okay? Shut up. Okay, anyway, this planet is a cyan ice giant planet, and was the first planet discovered through a telescope. It has 13 rings and is on a tilt. The god it's named after is a primordial one and the god of the sky and heavens. Interestingly, they're also the father of the Titans and is the only planet named after a Greek god, not a Roman one. I definitely designed them based on both ice and the god of sky facts. However, I also incorporated a lot more sci-fi elements, starting with the fact I wanted them to be made out of ice, but much like Saturn is being torn apart, or at least that's the case for most of their body, because they too have some gas elements on them that keep parts of them together, namely their limbs. They have a bunch of see-through elements such as their gloves, their boots and sash, and their eyeglasses thing, which is probably the most sci-fi thing in all of this. In that, you can also see that part of their face is also being torn apart slightly, but they do have some semblances of eyes on the lower and upper part of their face. I don't actually know if Uranus can see. They might be blind because the eyes don't have irises or anything in them. They're just outlines. So if you wanted to headcanon them as blind, you can do that. They also have a floating ponytail and some rings as well, like the tilted ones surrounding them. I also give them some ice wings to go with the sky god references. Their artwork was pretty hard to get right, mostly because of the composition. I was actually able to fix it with just the free transform tool, but it might have made some proportions look wonky. But hey, it's not human, so it's fine. And for the background, the sky is covered by the gas clouds, while floating ice is everywhere, including a large piece that Uranus is sitting on. In one of these ice pieces, you'll also find their portal. I imagine that this god is very cheeky and will mess with you until they get bored, and I think I was able to portray that very well here. And overall, I do really love how this design looks. Like I said, it's the most over-the-top sci-fi one, like something something you'd see from the 80s design, and I love that aesthetic. So this is a good one for me. This was a very cyan piece to work on, and the main accent was basically just like white and light gray, but it was not the bluest one yet. Because now we have Neptune. Of course, this one was going to end up being the most watery. At first, I figured that it was associated with water because of its name. Neptune's Greek equivalent is Poseidon. However, he was only considered a minor god until he became associated with the Greek god. But after looking more into it, it also appears that the planet has water within it. Because of this, I leaned way more into the Greek god angle, giving them horns that look like a trident, fishy ears, kind of, and lots of water droplets. Most of the design is actually just water, which ended up being a lot harder on me when drawing this than I thought. As I've said before, water, especially floating water, is not something I like drawing, and this had a whole lot of it. It also doesn't help that at the same time of me making this, I had just finished with either the drawing of Uranus or Demon Fossilor, but both also have a lot of floating water, so yeah, I was not excited to work on this after those. With that being said, the actual drawing of this did end up being my least favorite, but I do still like the design I made for them. Their torso has a lot of water droplets and also these swirled silver accessories. The planet does actually have some rings as well, very faint, but I gave them a little halo to match with the other ring-adorned planet gods. Their eyes and face were the most fun part to draw. I'm not sure why I decided to make them silver, probably just to make their face contrast with all the deep blue. In fact, I think that is the reason. But I shaded them to almost look like pools of silver, and I do really like how they look. They look very shiny and dream-like. I like that a lot. One last detail that I added was this shawl thing that I just kept as an outline to not be too distracting. And their portal is floating in front of them. Yeah, I don't have too much to say about this one. It's not my favorite piece, but I don't mind the design. It's also not my favorite because I do think the composition is a little bit too similar to Jupiter's. It's pretty similar. But if you don't look at them right next to each other, it doesn't look like that, so it's fine. And finally, our last one, Pluto. I don't care what you have to say, Pluto will always be a part of the main planets to me, because it doesn't help that they're named after the god of the underworld, and you can't disrespect that. Anyway, this one ended up being hard for me to design for some reason. This was the first idea I had, but it really didn't fit with the rest of the pantheon, so I completely redid the concept. Then, the drawing itself was hard because I went with a different layout than intended, which, looking back, I really wish I went with the first one instead. I think I just didn't want to worry about the portal again, since they would be super tiny compared to it, but I don't really like the composition I went with. But anyway, looking back at the facts, Pluto might have been habitable when it first formed, and maybe it was inhabited, but not anymore. This fits with the undead theme really well. The surface is as varied as Mars, but most noticeably has this big heart-shaped spot. I wanted their design to look similar to the others, but also appear quite undead. This somehow made them look like a Japanese Oni a little bit. I don't know how that combination made them look like that, it just did. I gave them these big claws with spots of red and a little blue all over them, as well as some black inky spots that kind of look very creepy. My favorite part of this design is definitely their heart. I made it off center with sharp edges around it, almost like the skin was opened up to view this. It's completely black except for the shiny red eye, and it's dripping black goo. I just love how this one detail somehow makes like the whole piece look really creepy, and is definitely the second most like creepier design aside from Jupiter. Their eyes on their face also match match the colors, and they appear to be using some sort of magic in this, maybe something to do with the undead. And much like Mercury, no one has come to see them, sharing a similar lonely fate. Poor Pluto. I like Pluto. I don't know why others don't like Pluto. Why was one of its new moons not named Persephone? That's just a ripoff. That was finally it. These were hard to draw, but for some reason, even harder to write for, as this script was hard to write. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed these designs. I really like how they all turned out. Even though it's actually been quite a while since I've drawn all of these, I do still like them, and I mainly just am still really happy with all the designs. I don't know, maybe I'll turn these into stuff on my shop, like prints. And I was thinking of doing like a proper lineup of these characters too. I could turn those into things. But yeah, the funny thing about these designs is I found that there was a lot of like natural similarities between all of them. For example, Jupiter and Mercury have a lot of similarities between them. Earth and Mars obviously have a lot of similarities as well. Saturn and Venus share some of like the golden accessories. Uranus and Saturn also share like a similar concept in their designs, and Neptune also looks quite a bit like Jupiter. The only one that kind of stands out is Pluto, which I think that fits really well. But yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you like these artworks, they are everywhere on my socials. I've actually posted these on multiple of my socials way before these, so they're definitely there. And I have my comics stuff as well, my Kickstarter stuff, and yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!